Tadi ngeri saya. Ah, Haji Lasti. So we have today here Gaden Jangste and the Jangste churches, and then the two ministers from two different states, Arunachal and Karnataka, and the Union Minister of State for Home Affairs, and everyone gathered here. So historically, the Mon people have a very close spiritual link with the Tibetans, and therefore the people and the Arunachal Pradesh government have wanted to commemorate my first teaching after coming into exile in Tawang Monastery 55 years ago, and therefore on this 55th anniversary to commemorate, you're commemorating it, and I would like to thank you all. So you, the Mon people from Monpa, do you understand me a little bit? So if you offer me Chang from Mun, then I will speak in Mun language. So you have a book, picture book, photo book of which shows my pictures from 55 years ago. After crossing Tibet, border of Tibet, I reached Gansamani and then Tawang. And so there are a few of the pictures from those travels. When I reached Mamang, perhaps, before reaching there, I had some intestinal problem, dysentery maybe, and so I suffered it for a few days. And so I very clearly remember this still. I stayed at Mamang for a few days in a villager's house, and I actually could hear the cows mooing downstairs, and my stomach was also guggling because of dire dysentery. And then when I reached Gansamani at the border of Tibet, and at the border where I met the External Affairs, Ministry of External Affairs, whom I have met before in China, Mr. Menon with an interpreter, and then also one of my bodyguards who used to Aduk Bombo, who used to live in Kalimpong region. And so three of them had come to the border to receive me. And so Menon actually stayed in Digilinga, Tibet, as an Indian representative in Tibet. And so when I saw three of them, I had a different feeling. because I was free from any danger now at that time. And so Mr. Menon told me that he is actually welcoming me on behalf of the Tibetan Indian government sent by Mr. Jawaharlal Nehru. So you, Mönpas, you have a special cap, a black kind of cap with some kind of pointed edges on the side. So you have very sincerely and delightfully received not only me but the Tibetans who came after me. And so you have actually helped as best as you can. And many of the member people have told our Tibetans that this year you had a great tragedy. And so, but people have told me that the Tsampa in Mön is difficult to eat for the Tibetans. And so such was a time that we went through. And so it's been now 55 years since then. And so during the last over 55 years, the Tibetan exiles, refugees, have received modern education and also the traditional education in the Buddhist Nalanda tradition of Buddhism. We're not only talking about religion alone. And so the monastic institutions, the Nalanda was an institution where all kinds of subjects were studied, not only Buddhism and religion as such. And in Tibet, we used to talk about 10 subject sciences, or 5 minor and 5 major. So Nalanda was as such an institution where all these 10 subjects were studied. And then, since the time of Chandarakshita, the great abbot, we have also been following the Nalanda tradition of Buddhism. And this is not only beneficial for Tibetans alone. And as Sikyong was speaking, I added that these Nalanda scholars or masters were scholars and thinkers. And so, as I said then, as soon as you hear about some topic, what the Nalanda masters have done is just immediately investigate into it, analyze the topic, and not just believe what is said by others, taking things for granted, but always critically analyzing things. And so you have to see what is the purpose and what is the ultimate goal of such and such teachings. And therefore, you need to have this critical thinking. And therefore, Tibetans who follow the Nalanda tradition in this way, we have actually opened our intellects widely. And so, such a tradition is not only beneficial to Tibetans, but we can actually serve the whole world with this tradition that we have. Although we in our settlements the conditions are not excellent, but then despite the limited resources, our monastic institutions have been re-established and carry on with this study, the rigorous study of this. And then many people come from different parts of the world, and particularly there are people who come from the Asian regions who follow the same Nalanda tradition, from Japan, Vietnam, Korea. And now we have people especially taking interest in this Tibetan Buddhist tradition of the Nalanda tradition. And so the number is increasing. And therefore, since coming into exile, we emphasized education in modern subjects and also to preserve and our own tradition of the Nalanda lineage. And therefore, since 1960, we requested Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, and many of the states were requested by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru for resettlement of Tibetans, and the best response came from the Mysore state. At that time, it's known as Mysore state, but in any case, the Karnataka state. Mr. Nichalingappa, whom I knew since 1956, and therefore he was someone who actually was dedicated to Tibetan issue, and therefore he responded to Nehru's request for giving land to Tibetans for resettlement. And therefore we are very grateful to the Karnataka government. And so in Tibetan saying, we have a saying that if you get one, then you still insist for another thing. And so likewise, when we got land in Balakope and other areas in Karnataka, we requested for more lands, and therefore we got the land in Kollegal. And so the largest number of Tibetans in exile, refugee Tibetans in exile, is in the Karnataka state. And so I would like to thank you for this plan to build a guest house for pilgrims. And then the monastic institutions. I don't have anything to say about the smaller monasteries, the minor ones. So these bigger monastic institutions are not just simple monasteries, but they are learning centers for us. And so if we talk about in the modern terms, these are universities. And so Nalanda was also a university in those days, in its own time. And in Nalanda University, they also have the study of epistemology. And so in the monastic institutions, we are also trying to introduce the modern education, modern knowledge of science and so forth, as we have already started something. And perhaps in the art, we can also add science. Our traditional subject called art, Sorigpa. So what we are trying to, what we are attempting is to establish these monastic institutions to become institutions where you have both the modern and the traditional subjects. And so we shouldn't, we are not contented with our own, whatever we have. In the world, people are never contented with the material development, material facilities, and therefore we make lots of development, and therefore we too are trying to not remain contented, but make more progress. And in Bailakopi, we have Serajay Monastery, and so for the last few years, the Tumkur University near Bangalore and Serajay have actually been trying to collaborate or for research and so forth. And so, and therefore, our monastic institutions in this very state, if we could actually work together with the universities in the state here, I can see the benefit of exchanging with scientists for the last 30 years, which I have done. So with regard to the external world, of course, there is a description about the external world in Abhidhamma Kosha, but it's not so detailed and precise. Whereas we can learn a lot about matter from science. And then, with regards to the modern science, psychology is not so deep. And therefore, the rich heritage of psychology that we have in the Indian tradition, the many scientists are actually taking interest in it. And they find it really helpful. And so if we could also work together with the Indian universities, it would be beneficial to both ourselves as well as the Indians. As you have said, all our knowledge came from Nalanda tradition from India. We did not find all this knowledge from our own investigation. And most of the Nalanda University scholars were South Indians. So I usually say that perhaps the South Indians have a very special brain. So the knowledge that we have came from India, but in India it had declined so much. And therefore, this ancient Indian knowledge, this deep, profound knowledge, which is relevant to the 21st century, if we could actually collaborate and work together to preserve and promote it, it would be mutually beneficial. And here we have monks, abbots, and so forth. As I'm having this kind of huge expectations, do not let me down, okay? Every one of you has responsibility. You should feel determined. You should not take things for granted as if it's just a usual thing, a normal thing. So first we came through Tawang in 1959, and emotionally also the sixth Dalai Lama, Changyang Gyatso, was born in Tawang, Mun. And I actually have visited it. Whenever I visit Tawang, Mun, I used to go there in his family house. And so some of you have actually some stories of his childhood, very interesting ones. And so psychologically, we are very close, emotionally also. And so, as I said before, all these years you have been really dedicated and devoted, unflinching, with the unflinching devotion to me. And then many of your children and people have come to these monastic institutions to study. And in the future also, first, Buddhism originated in India and spread to Tibet, and from Tibet to Mongolia, and then from Mun and Kunu, the Kinnour region, and also the Kelang and Ladakh regions. Buddhism spread from there, from Tibet. And I met one professor from Kyrgyzstan, a former external minister who had retired, and then with him came some professors. So they told me, I don't remember, I've forgotten the name of the place they mentioned, but what they found was on a coffin, a stone with the inscription of Om Mani Padme Hum in Tibetan engraved on it. And so this stone was actually laid on the coffin that they found in Kyrgyzstan. So they showed me a photo of it. And so what this shows is that Tibetan Buddhism spread towards those regions as well. And then in Pakistan, region also, there are people who are Muslims, but then sometimes they invite Tibetans, Buddhist monks to do prayers. And so what this shows is that there has been this influence of spread of Buddhism in those regions near the Pakistan border. And then our monks and so if you could send your children to become monks or nuns, and then in our schools, secular schools, to learn English, Tibetan, and because these schools, for their medium of study is mostly English, and so your children could learn English and also Tibetan and study Buddhism. And therefore, the monks, if you send your children to become monks and nuns, you should not just think of for them to change their clothes and to robes, monastic robes, but to actually study the Dharma. So we should strengthen our connection. And we have Sikyong today here, and also the Tibetan Minister for Home Affairs, Dramakeri. And so if you could actually approach us, and then we will also try to have a stronger connection with you, and we could work together. And so yesterday I visited a Mongolian hostel in Gaden Monastery. And so there are many of them, the Mongolians, who are studying in our monastic institutions today. And so in our monastic institutions, we didn't make any, we didn't discriminate other people from other countries. There were Chinese, there were other Mongolians, and even some Japanese came to study, and therefore. Even in exile now, you have the opportunity to join our monasteries. And therefore, Chinese, whether male, female, male or female, and Japanese as well, and Vietnamese, and Koreans. So there will be more and more number of people from these regions, these countries also, to study in our monastic institutions. And then with regard to the Vinaya, we would also have perhaps people from Burma, Thailand, Sri Lanka, and Cambodia, and so forth. And so I have requested, in the past, I had requested the Tibetan University in Sarnath. So you should also work together with them as well. And in Jangste Monastery of Gaden, there are few Indians who have joined it. And so Geshe Samdela knows about this. And so to study Buddhism, we should not say that people have to become monks. And so we can actually have even lay people, boys and girls, to study Buddhism. Of course, in the Tibetan University in Sarnath, you have lay people as well as monastics. And so we can actually consider the subjects that are taught here as academic subjects and have people, lay as well as monastics, to study. So we as Tibetans must make some contribution in terms of our education in Karnataka. And so we will contribute with our knowledge to the state, and you should also support us financially. Thank you.